Look, I'm going to level with you right from the start. When the Galactic Educational Exchange Program sent me, Alex Morrison, unremarkable human male from Ohio, to the prestigious Vex'tai Combat Academy on Kepler 442b, I thought the biggest challenge would be figuring out how to use a bathroom designed for beings with tentacles instead of legs. I was wrong. So very catastrophically wrong. The real challenge turned out to be convincing my alien classmates that humans weren't actually made of tissue paper and good intentions. Apparently our reputation in the galaxy was less apex predator from a death world, and more adorable bipedal puppies, who somehow achieve spaceflight through pure luck and excessive caffeine consumption. Which brings us to today. Specifically, to this moment in advanced combat theory where instructor Vex'tai, a 7-foot-tall mantis-looking nightmare with more sharp edges than a geometry textbook, just broke my lab partner's nose with what he probably considered a gentle corrective tap. Yeah, this was going to be fun. Combat theory, by the way, is what they call it when they want to sound educational and sophisticated. What it actually is a class where alien teenagers learn how to efficiently dismantle each other without creating too much paperwork for the medical staff. Think mixed martial arts, except everyone has different numbers of limbs. Some breathe methane, and the referee has compound eyes and a severe attitude problem. The Vex'tai Academy sits on a planet that's basically what would happen if someone took Earth's Australia and cranked the everything wants to kill you dial up to 11. The gravity's about 1.3 times what I'm used to. The atmosphere has just enough sulfur compounds to make everything smell like rotten eggs. And the local wildlife includes something called a razor spine prowler that sounds exactly as friendly as you'd expect. In other words, it's the perfect place to train the galaxy's future military leaders, diplomats, and, apparently, one very confused human exchange student. My lab partner for this particular exercise in institutional sadism is Kira Vasquez, and she's about as close to a perfect specimen of human engineering as you're likely to find. 5'6", built like a marathon runner who decided to take up powerlifting as a hobby, with dark hair that she keeps in a practical bun, and the kind of focused intensity that makes smart people nervous and stupid people do stupid things. She's also, as of 30 seconds ago, bleeding from her nose after instructor Vex'tai decided to demonstrate proper restraint protocol by using her face as a practice target. Observe the incorrect defensive posture, Vex'tai announces to the class, his voice carrying that particular tone of condescension that's apparently universal among gym teachers regardless of species. His chitinous arms click as he gestures at Kira, who's still crouched where his demonstration left her. The human fails to account for superior reach and leverage. This results in easily exploited vulnerabilities. The rest of the class, a mixture of Vex'tai warriors in training, a couple of crystalline Silthek, and what I'm pretty sure is a sentient cloud of gas that somehow managed to enroll, watch with the kind of academic interest usually reserved for particularly boring lectures on tax law. I'm watching too, but for entirely different reasons. See, here's the thing about humans that the rest of the galaxy hasn't quite figured out yet. We're really bad at accepting defeat gracefully. It's not necessarily a virtue, it's gotten us into more trouble than I can count, but it's definitely a defining characteristic. And right now, watching Kira wipe blood from her nose with the back of her hand while maintaining eye contact with our instructor, I'm getting that familiar feeling that usually precedes someone doing something spectacularly stupid. The human physiology, Vex'tai continues, apparently warming to his subject, is inefficient for combat applications. Fragile bone structure, limited flexibility, poor sensory apparatus. It is remarkable that such creatures achieved interstellar travel without first achieving extinction. A few of the Vex'tai students produce what I've learned to recognize as their version of laughter, a sort of rhythmic clicking sound that makes me think of castanets made from human teeth. Kira stands up slowly, testing her balance. There's something different about her posture now. Something that makes the hair on my arms stand up. It's subtle, a slight shift in weight distribution, a barely perceptible change in how she holds her shoulders. I've seen that look before, usually right before someone's day takes a dramatic turn for the worse. Perhaps, she says, her voice perfectly level despite the blood still trickling from her nose. We could try that demonstration again? I think I understand the principle now. Oh, hell. Now, I should probably mention that humans have what you might charitably call a reputation in certain galactic circles. The problem is that it's the wrong reputation entirely. Through a series of unfortunate diplomatic incidents, translation errors, and what I can only assume was some truly spectacular misunderstanding, we've somehow become known as the galaxy's designated victims. The Federation databases apparently classify Earth as a Grade 7 developing world with standard atmospheric conditions and docile indigenous population. Docile.
Indigenous.
Population. I cannot stress enough how wrong that assessment is. But here's the thing about being consistently underestimated. Eventually, someone's going to push too far. And when they do, the results tend to be educational. Instructor Vex'tai regards Kira with what passes for amusement among his species, a slight tilting of his triangular head, and a barely audible whistling sound through his breathing slits. Very well, he says, settling into a combat stance that looks like a praying mantis that's been taking steroids and anger management classes. Perhaps this human requires a more thorough demonstration of proper technique. The other students shift nervously. Even the sentient gas cloud seems to compress itself slightly, which I think might be its equivalent of leaning forward for a better view. Kira nods once, short and sharp, then moves into position. To the untrained eye, which, let's be honest, includes pretty much everyone in this room except maybe me, she looks like she's doing exactly what she did before. Same stance, same spacing, same apparent lack of awareness about her supposed structural vulnerabilities. But I can see the differences. The way she shifted her weight onto the balls of her feet, how her hands are positioned just slightly differently. The barely perceptible angle of her torso that suggests she's thinking about vectors and leverage in ways that would make an engineer proud. More importantly, I can see something in her eyes that wasn't there before. Something cold and calculating and just a little bit hungry. This is the look humans get when they stop playing games. Begin when ready, Vex'tai announces, and immediately launches into what's probably a textbook attack pattern. A straight thrust with his primary manipulator aimed at center mass, followed by a sweeping motion designed to knock his opponent off balance. It's fast, really fast. The kind of fast that would make a normal human question their life choices and possibly their religious beliefs. Kira isn't normal. Instead of trying to block or dodge, the obvious responses that Vex'tai is clearly expecting, she does something that would have made her ancient ancestors proud. She moves forward, not back, straight into the attack, inside his reach, where those long limbs become a liability instead of an advantage. The impact of his strike hits her in the shoulder instead of center mass. It's still enough force to stagger a normal person, but Kira just absorbs it, uses the momentum to pivot, and suddenly she's not where she's supposed to be according to any reasonable tactical analysis. She's exactly where she wants to be. What happens next takes maybe 2 seconds. 2 seconds that are going to be replayed in tactical analysis classes for the next several decades, assuming anyone believes the footage. Kira's left hand finds the joint where Vex'tai's primary limb connects to his torso. Her right hand grabs his secondary manipulator, and then she demonstrates one of humanity's most underrated evolutionary advantages. We are absolutely terrifying when we decide to break things. The sound is memorable, kind of like snapping a large branch, except with more biological squishing noises and a distinctly unpleasant harmonic resonance that I'm going to be hearing in my nightmares for weeks. Vex'tai makes a sound I didn't know his species was capable of. Something between a shriek and a whistling kettle having an emotional breakdown. He hits the ground hard enough to bounce slightly, which is impressive considering the enhanced gravity. The silence that follows is the kind of absolute quiet that usually precedes either spontaneous applause or someone calling the police. Kira stands over him, still holding the disconnected portion of his arm, looking slightly surprised that her plan actually worked. Blood continues to drip from her nose, but she doesn't seem to notice. I think, she says conversationally, I understand the principle now. The medical bay at Vex'tai Academy is what you'd get if you took a standard hospital and redesigned it for patients who might have anywhere from 0 to 12 limbs, varying atmospheric requirements, and the occasional need for total biological reconstruction. It's actually pretty impressive, in a vaguely unsettling way. Instructor Vex'tai is currently occupying Bioreconstruction Pod 7, where a team of automated medical systems are attempting to reattach his arm while simultaneously figuring out exactly how a fragile human managed to remove it in the first place. The medical AI has been muttering to itself in binary for the last hour, which apparently translates to roughly, "This should not be physically possible," in 17 different languages. Kira is sitting on a standard examination platform, letting a different set of medical equipment poke and prod at her nose while trying to explain to the increasingly confused medical staff that no, she doesn't need psychological evaluation, and yes, she's quite sure she meant to do that. I'm sitting nearby, partly to provide moral support, and partly because someone needs to translate between human normal and galactic standard. And apparently, I'm the only one present who speaks both dialects. The injury patterns are inconsistent with standard biomechanical models, the medical AI announces, its synthesized voice carrying a note of what I can only describe as electronic frustration. Human grip strength should be insufficient to generate the observed trauma. Have you considered updating your biomechanical models? I suggest helpfully. The AI pauses for several seconds, an eternity in computer terms, before responding with what sounds suspiciously like a digital sigh. The existing models are based on comprehensive analysis of human physiological data provided by the Federation database. Ah, I say, beginning to understand the scope of the problem. And where did the Federation get that data? Initial human contact protocols, diplomatic medical examinations, and voluntary physiological assessments conducted during trade negotiations. Right. So their entire understanding of human capabilities is based on what happens when we're on our best behavior, trying to make a good impression, and definitely not trying to break anyone's arms off. That would be like judging a tiger's hunting capabilities based on watching it nap in a zoo. The human female demonstrates anomalous strength characteristics, the AI continues, apparently working through its confusion in real time. Preliminary calculations suggest force generation approximately 340% above expected parameters. Kira snorts, which causes the medical scanner currently examining her nose to emit a confused beeping sound. That's not anomalous. That's normal. Your parameters are wrong. Perhaps, I interject before the AI can launch into what I suspect would be a very long argument about statistical analysis. You should update your database with some more comprehensive human physiological data. Such data is not available through standard academic channels. Of course it isn't. Because the kind of data they'd need, humans under stress, humans in combat, humans who've decided that someone needs to have a very bad day, isn't exactly the sort of thing we share during polite diplomatic exchanges. The medical bay doors slide open with a soft hiss, and Director Veltar glides in. If Instructor Zixketh looked like a praying mantis with anger issues, Director Veltar looks like what would happen if you crossed an octopus with a philosophy professor and gave the result tenure. Multiple appendages, complex patterns of bioluminescent communication organs, and the kind of measured, contemplative manner that suggests deep thoughts and deeper problems. Cadet Morrison, she says, her translator rendering her natural speech patterns into something resembling English with a slight accent that I can't quite place. Cadet Vasquez, I trust you are both well. It's phrased as a question, but her tone suggests she already knows the answer and is mostly just being polite. We're fine, Director, I reply. Kira's nose isn't broken, just bruised, and Instructor Zixketh should be back to normal in a few hours according to the medical staff. Indeed. One of her appendages makes a complex gesture that I think means either satisfactory or mildly disappointed. The nuances of Veltar body language are still beyond me. I confess myself curious about the precise sequence of events that led to this outcome. Here we go. The thing about explaining human behavior to aliens is that it requires a fundamental shift in perspective that most species aren't really equipped to handle. You have to start with the basic assumption that humans are not, in fact, rational actors who make carefully considered decisions based on available data and predictable behavioral models. We are instead semi-domesticated primates with anxiety disorders and a complex relationship with authority figures. Well, I begin, trying to figure out how to explain the concept of proportional response to someone whose species probably evolved from something resembling a particularly intellectual jellyfish. Humans have this thing about fairness. Director Veltar's chromatophores shift to a pattern I've learned to associate with polite confusion. Fairness? It's a behavioral concept, Kira adds, apparently deciding to join the conversation. The medical scanner has finished with her nose and moved on to some kind of general health assessment that involves a lot of blinking lights and soft humming sounds. We have this built-in expectation that force should be met with proportional counterforce. Proportional, the director repeats slowly. Right. So when Instructor Zixketh broke Kira's nose, her brain automatically calculated an appropriate response, which was to remove his arm? Well, Kira says, sounding slightly defensive. I didn't remove it. I just disconnected it, temporarily. The joint wasn't actually severed, just dislocated in several places simultaneously. I can practically hear the director's worldview creaking under the strain of trying to process this information. Let me ask you something, I continue, because apparently I hate myself. What did your instructor training protocols tell you about managing human students? Standard xenological behavioral models suggest that humans respond well to firm guidance and clear hierarchical structures. Physical correction should be minimal and primarily symbolic, as human pain tolerance is significantly below galactic average. Oh boy. Right, so here's the thing about those models, I say, settling in for what's clearly going to be a long conversation. They're based on humans who are trying to be polite. Humans who are representing their species in a diplomatic context. Humans who have been specifically selected for their ability to get along with others and not cause international incidents. The director's chromatophores shift again, this time to what I think might be dawning comprehension mixed with mild horror. Kira and I continue, are not those humans. We're the other kind, Kira adds helpfully. The kind they usually try to keep away from delicate interspecies relationships. This is true. My acceptance to the exchange program had less to do with my sterling academic record. It isn't. Or my diplomatic skills. They don't exist. And more to do with the fact that I scored unusually high on something called adaptive stress response under adverse conditions, which I'm pretty sure is military jargon for doesn't panic when everything goes sideways. Kira's here because she was the only volunteer when they asked for someone willing to spend a year on a planet where the local ecosystem considers humans a light snack. The behavioral models, Director Veltar says slowly, may require revision. You think? Kira asks, which earns her a warning look from me, because sarcasm doesn't always translate well across species barriers. The medical scanner emits a cheerful chime and retracts its various appendages. Apparently Kira's health assessment is complete, and the results are interesting. Fascinating, the medical AI announces. Subject demonstrates physiological stress markers consistent with recent moderate physical activity, but no indicators of psychological trauma or abnormal aggression patterns. Heart rate, hormone levels, and neurological activity all within normal human parameters. In other words, breaking our instructor's arm was just another Tuesday for Kira, which, honestly, probably says something concerning about either her background or human educational standards in general. There is one other matter, Director Veltar says, and something in her tone suggests we've moved from academic curiosity to official business. Instructor Zixketh has filed a formal complaint regarding inappropriate use of force during an educational exercise. Of course he has. The Administrative Resolution Chamber at Vex'tai Academy is designed to be imposing in that particular way that bureaucratic institutions seem to specialize in. High ceilings, austere lighting, and furniture that's been carefully engineered to be uncomfortable for as many different species as possible, while maintaining an air of official dignity. I'm sitting at what I assume is the defendant's table, though the concept of table is somewhat flexible when you're dealing with furniture designed for beings who might have tentacles instead of legs. Kira is beside me, looking remarkably calm for someone facing potential disciplinary action from an interstellar educational institution. Across from us, Instructor Zixketh occupies what's probably the complainant's position. His arm has been successfully reattached, though he's wearing some kind of medical support device that keeps making soft beeping sounds. He looks about as pleased as you'd expect from someone who recently discovered that his assumptions about human fragility were, shall we say, incomplete. Director Veltar presides over the proceedings from an elevated platform that accommodates her unique physiology, while giving her a clear view of all participants. Her chromatophores are displaying what I've learned to recognize as official neutrality, which looks like a constantly shifting pattern of muted blues and grays. The complaint alleges excessive force in response to standard instructional correction, she begins, consulting a datapad with several of her appendages while keeping her primary attention focused on us. Specifically, that Cadet Vasquez deliberately inflicted severe injury in retaliation for minor disciplinary action. This is where things get interesting, because the word excessive implies that there's a standard scale of appropriate force, and I'm willing to bet that scale doesn't include recent updates to account for human behavioral patterns. With respect, Director, I say, standing, because it seems like the kind of situation that calls for formal courtroom etiquette, even if I'm not entirely sure what that looks like in this context. I think we need to examine the assumptions underlying that complaint. Elaborate. Right. Here goes nothing. Instructor Zixketh's actions were based on the assumption that a minor disciplinary action for a human would be something that caused minimal physical harm and served primarily as a behavioral correction. But that assumption is based on incomplete data about human physiology and psychology. I'm trying to sound official and diplomatic, which is challenging because my natural tendency is towards sarcasm and informal language. But this is important, and not just for Kira and me. From a human perspective, I continue, deliberately breaking someone's nose isn't minor disciplinary action. It's assault. And humans have very specific behavioral responses to assault, particularly when it occurs in a context where we can't simply leave. Director Veltar's chromatophores shift to what might be interest or confusion. It's hard to tell. Furthermore, Kira adds, apparently deciding to join the defense, the response was proportional according to human behavioral standards. Instructor Zixketh used his natural physical advantages, reach, leverage, and knowledge of human vulnerabilities to inflict what he considered minor harm. I used my natural advantages, flexibility, grip strength, and knowledge of Vex'tai anatomy, to inflict what I considered equivalent harm. Equivalent, Zixketh interjects, his translator rendering what sounds like indignation mixed with disbelief. The human damaged major joint assemblies requiring extensive medical intervention. And you broke my nose, Kira replies evenly, which, from a human perspective, is also a major injury requiring medical intervention. I can see the problem here. To a Vex'tai, with their chitinous exoskeleton and redundant joint systems, a dislocated arm is a serious injury. To a human, with our relatively fragile bone structure, a broken nose is equally serious. But the two species have completely different baselines for what constitutes minor versus major harm. Perhaps, Director Veltar suggests, we should establish a clearer understanding of comparative injury scales between species. That would be helpful, I agree. But I think there's a larger issue here. Oh boy, here I go again. The fundamental problem is that the Academy's behavioral management protocols are based on the assumption that all students share similar thresholds for acceptable treatment, but humans don't fit that model. I take a deep breath, because what I'm about to say is either going to resolve this situation or get us both expelled. Humans are a predator species from a Class 12 death world. We evolved in an environment where everything, the weather, the geography, the wildlife, and each other, was actively trying to kill us on a regular basis. Our behavioral patterns, our physical capabilities, and our psychological responses are all calibrated for that environment. The room is very quiet now. Even the soft background hum of the environmental system seems muted. When you put humans in a structured, hierarchical environment like an educational institution, we adapt. We follow the rules, we respect authority, we try to get along. But that adaptation has limits, and those limits are based on our survival instincts. Kira nods, picking up the thread. Instructor Zixketh crossed one of those limits. From a human perspective, he demonstrated that the normal social contract, you treat me with reasonable respect, I follow your authority, was no longer in effect. So I responded according to the backup protocol. Which is? Director Veltar asks, though I suspect she's already figured out the answer. Violence, I say simply. Immediate, decisive, and exactly proportional to the threat level demonstrated by the aggressor. The silence that follows is the kind of deep, contemplative quiet that suggests everyone present is rapidly recalculating their understanding of several fundamental concepts. Director Veltar's chromatophores cycle through what I've learned to recognize as deep thought. Complex patterns of shifting colors that probably correspond to whatever passes for contemplation among her species. Instructor Zixketh has gone very still, which among the Vex'tai usually indicates either intense concentration or the early stages of emotional shutdown. Kira, meanwhile, looks like she's wondering if she should have mentioned the violence thing a bit more diplomatically. This presents, Director Veltar says finally, a significant educational challenge. That's one way to put it. The Academy's mission is to prepare students for leadership roles in an increasingly complex galactic community. This requires developing both technical competencies and interpersonal skills across multiple species barriers. She pauses, apparently organizing her thoughts. However, our current pedagogical approach appears to be fundamentally incompatible with human behavioral patterns. It's not just humans, I point out, because I'm apparently committed to making this conversation as complicated as possible. I mean, we're probably the most dramatic example, but I bet if you looked at your disciplinary records, you'd find similar issues with other predator species. The director's appendages make a complex gesture toward her data pad, which immediately springs to life and begins displaying what I assume is statistical information. Interesting, she says after a moment. Incident reports involving creche students show a 340% higher rate of disproportionate response complaints compared to baseline. Velkari students demonstrate similar patterns, though less pronounced. Creche are basically what you'd get if you crossed a wolf with a rocket scientist and gave the result anger management issues. Velkari look like armored bears and have a cultural concept of personal space that extends roughly 15 feet in all directions. See, here's the thing, I say, warming to my subject because apparently I can't leave well enough alone. Most of the galaxy's intelligent species evolved from prey animals, herd animals, or filter feeders. Cooperative social structures, conflict avoidance, hierarchical submission to authority. These are all natural behavioral patterns for them. But humans, Creche, and Velkari evolved from predators. Our natural behavioral patterns include territorial defense, challenge response, and what biologists politely call resource competition through direct confrontation. You mean fighting? Kira clarifies helpfully. I mean fighting, I agree. And when you put predator species students into an educational system designed for prey species psychology, you get this. I gesture vaguely at the whole situation. The medical reports, the formal complaints, the general air of administrative confusion that seems to be hanging over the proceedings like a cloud of bureaucratic uncertainty. So what do you propose? Director Veltar asks. Oh, she's actually asking for suggestions. I was not prepared for this level of responsibility. Well, I say, scrambling to come up with something that sounds like an actual solution rather than just extended complaining. Maybe separate training protocols? Or at least modified behavioral management guidelines for predator species students? That could be interpreted as discriminatory, Instructor Zix points out, speaking for the first time since the discussion started. His voice carries a note of what might be concern or possibly just professional anxiety. Not discriminatory, Kira says. Accommodating, like how the environmental systems adjust atmospheric composition for different species, or how the nutrition center provides species-appropriate dietary options. She has a point. The Academy already makes extensive accommodations for physiological differences between species. It's not much of a stretch to extend that to psychological and behavioral differences. Furthermore, I add, because I'm on a roll now, it's not like predator species students can't learn to work within cooperative frameworks. We do it all the time, but the training approach needs to account for our natural responses to authority and hierarchy. Explain. Right. Time to get specific. Most prey species respond to authority through submission and compliance. For them, clear hierarchical structures and firm guidance work because they activate natural behavioral patterns. Predator species respond to authority through evaluation and consent. We'll follow leadership, but first we need to establish that the leader is competent and worthy of our respect. And that evaluation process includes testing boundaries. Testing boundaries, Director Veltar repeats, and I can practically hear the gears turning in her head. Right. What just happened in class wasn't Kira being defiant or aggressive. It was her testing whether Instructor Zix was competent to be her instructor. His response to that test, using physical force instead of demonstrating superior skill or knowledge, indicated that he wasn't. So she removed him from the position, Kira adds matter-of-factly. The director's chromatophores shift to what I'm pretty sure is the visual equivalent of a profound headache. What follows is the kind of administrative discussion that would be familiar to anyone who's ever tried to explain why their perfectly reasonable actions resulted in someone else's perfectly reasonable complaints. Lots of careful language, diplomatic phrasing, and the gradual construction of a bureaucratic framework that will allow everyone involved to pretend this makes sense. The short version. Kira's actions are officially classified as culturally appropriate defensive response to perceived threat escalation, rather than unprovoked assault on educational personnel. Instructor Zix actions are reclassified as inappropriate application of disciplinary protocols due to insufficient cross-species behavioral training, rather than legitimate educational correction. Everyone involved gets mandatory sensitivity training. The Academy's behavioral management protocols get a comprehensive review with input from experts in predator species psychology. And Kira and I get transferred to a new section of advanced combat theory that's specifically designed for students who might occasionally need to break things. It's not exactly a victory, but it's not exactly a defeat either. More like a draw that leaves everyone slightly confused but mostly intact. There is one final matter, Director Veltar says as we're preparing to leave. The incident has attracted attention from the Federation Educational Board. They're sending a review team to assess our handling of human students. Of course they are. Is that a problem? I ask, though I suspect I already know the answer. That depends largely on whether the review team concludes that this was an isolated incident resulting from inadequate institutional procedures, or evidence of fundamental incompatibility between human students and standard galactic educational frameworks. Right. So no pressure there. We'll try to avoid breaking anyone else's arms, Kira offers helpfully. That would be appreciated, the director replies, with what I choose to interpret as dry humor rather than genuine concern. The walk back to our dormitory takes us through the Academy's central plaza, which is designed to showcase the institution's commitment to interspecies cooperation and understanding. Students from dozens of different worlds gather here to study, socialize, and presumably learn valuable lessons about tolerance and mutual respect. Today's lesson seems to be, humans are more complicated than originally advertised. Word travels fast in an enclosed community, and by now everyone knows about the combat theory incident. We're getting a lot of looks, some curious, some nervous, and a few that suggest certain students are rapidly reassessing their previous assumptions about human capabilities. Think this is going to be a problem? I ask as we navigate around a group of Silthek students who seem to be having an animated discussion about structural engineering principles. Their crystalline bodies make soft chiming sounds when they move, like wind chimes made of very expensive glass. Which part? Kira replies. The fact that we're now officially classified as potentially dangerous, the Federation review team, or the general campus atmosphere of nervous fascination? All of it, I guess. She considers this for a moment. Probably, but it was going to be a problem eventually anyway. This is true. The thing about being human in a galaxy that doesn't really understand humans is that sooner or later someone's going to push the wrong button. Better that it happened in a controlled environment with adequate medical facilities than during some kind of diplomatic crisis. Besides, she continues, maybe this will actually help in the long run. If they're going to work with humans, they need to understand what they're actually dealing with. We pass the Academy's Memorial Garden, where plaques honor students and faculty who died in various conflicts throughout galactic history. It's a sobering reminder that for all the talk of cooperation and mutual understanding, the galaxy can be a dangerous place. You know what the really ironic part is? I say, stopping to read one of the memorial inscriptions. What? We're supposed to be the scary ones. Humans, I mean. Death World predators, apex killers, all that. But look around. I gesture at the Academy's architecture. The defensive shields visible in the distance, the subtle but unmistakable military overtones that underlie everything about this place. Every species here evolved in environments that shaped them for survival. The Vex'tai developed those reflexes and natural weapons because their homeworld has predators that make Earth's tigers look like house cats. The Kresh have pack-hunting instincts because they needed them to survive. Even the Silthek have defensive capabilities that could probably level a city block if they felt threatened. So what's your point? My point is that everyone's dangerous. We're just dangerous in a way that doesn't fit their models. Kira nods thoughtfully, and that makes us unpredictable. Exactly, which is probably the most dangerous thing of all. Our dormitory is designed with the same commitment to interspecies accommodation as the rest of the Academy, which means it's a fascinating exercise in architectural compromise. Variable atmosphere controls, modular furniture that can be reconfigured for different physiologies, and soundproofing rated for species whose normal speaking voices can shatter glass. My room is standard human compatible. Earth normal atmosphere, gravity compensation to bring the local 1.3 G down to something more manageable, and furniture that assumes I have 2 arms, 2 legs, and a preference for sitting rather than hanging from the ceiling. Kira's room is identical, though she's made some modifications that suggest she's planning for a longer stay than originally anticipated. Extra equipment for maintaining her physical conditioning, language learning materials for 3 different species, and what looks like a comprehensive technical manual for something called Advanced Biomechanical Analysis. I don't ask. The common area between our rooms features a large window that looks out over the Academy's training grounds, where various classes are currently engaged in exercises that range from the recognizably military to the completely incomprehensible. Right now, there's a group of what I think are advanced tactical students practicing something that looks like 3-dimensional chess played with explosives. So, I say, settling into one of the human-scaled chairs. What do you think happens next? Kira is standing at the window, watching the training exercises with the kind of professional interest that suggests she's mentally cataloging techniques and weaknesses. Short term, we keep our heads down, don't break anyone else's limbs, and try to demonstrate that humans can play well with others when properly managed. And long term? Long term? She turns away from the window, and there's something in her expression that reminds me why she volunteered for this assignment in the first place. Long term, I think we're going to end up changing how the galaxy thinks about humans. This is either inspiring or terrifying, depending on how you look at it. Is that a good thing? Probably not, she admits. But it's necessary. Right now we're a curiosity, a minor species from an unremarkable world that somehow stumbled into interstellar travel without anyone really noticing. She moves to the equipment storage area and begins pulling out what looks like exercise gear, though some of it is clearly custom modified in ways that probably void several manufacturers' warranties. But we're not going to stay minor forever. Human population is growing, our technology is advancing, and we're starting to spread out into the galaxy in significant numbers. Eventually, someone's going to have to deal with us as we actually are, rather than as they think we should be. She's right, of course. The Federation's current approach to human integration seems to be based on the assumption that we'll gradually adapt to galactic norms and become more civilized, I guess. More like everyone else. But that's not how humans work. We don't adapt by becoming less human. We adapt by making our environment more human-compatible. You know what I think the real problem is? I say, watching her assemble what appears to be a resistance training system that would probably qualify as a medieval torture device on most worlds. What? Everyone keeps treating this like it's about humans being too aggressive or too violent. But that's not the issue. I stand up and move to the window, looking out at the training exercises. The tactical students have moved on to something that involves a lot of coordinated movement, and what might be either advanced mathematics or interpretive dance. The issue is that humans are optimized for a completely different kind of problem-solving approach. Most galactic species developed intelligence as a way to better cooperate with their environment. Humans developed intelligence as a way to dominate our environment. So when we encounter a problem, like an instructor who's treating us inappropriately, our instinctive response isn't to adapt or submit or find a diplomatic solution. Our instinctive response is to fix the problem by making it stop being a problem. Kira pauses in her equipment assembly to give me a look that suggests I might be overthinking this. Alex, she says patiently, I broke his arm because he broke my nose, and I was tired of being treated like a defective toy. It doesn't need to be more complicated than that. Fair point, but that's exactly what I mean. I continue, because apparently I can't let this go. To you, it's a simple cause and effect relationship. Someone treats you badly, you make them stop. Problem solved. To everyone else, it's a complex diplomatic situation involving cultural misunderstandings, institutional protocols, and potential interspecies relations complications. And I think you had the right approach. The next few days pass in what you might charitably call an atmosphere of heightened awareness. Word of the combat theory incident has spread throughout the academy, and suddenly everyone seems very interested in observing human behavior patterns. It's like being a zoo exhibit, except the visitors can talk back and occasionally ask probing questions about your psychological development. The Federation review team arrives on schedule, consisting of 3 individuals who manage to look simultaneously official and deeply concerned. There's Director Ilksvoth, a tall, graceful being whose species I don't recognize but who seems to communicate primarily through controlled bioluminescence. Assistant Director Kulneth, who looks like someone crossed an iguana with a filing cabinet and gave the result a law degree. And Dr. Sivana, whose credentials apparently include advanced degrees in xenopsychology, interspecies conflict resolution, and what the translator renders as applied diplomatic theory. They spend their first day conducting individual interviews with students, faculty, and administrative staff. I get called in on the second day. The interview room is another exercise in institutional neutrality, bland, comfortable, and carefully designed to avoid favoring any particular species' environmental preferences. Dr. Sivana sits across from me, her multiple appendages manipulating a datapad while her primary attention remains focused on my responses. Cadet Morrison, she begins, her translator rendering her natural speech into English with what sounds like a slight academic accent. We're here to assess the Academy's handling of human students and to determine whether modifications to current protocols are necessary. I understand. Can you describe, in your own words, the sequence of events that led to the incident in advanced combat theory? So I do. I try to be objective, sticking to observable facts rather than interpretations or assumptions. What Instructor Zixketh did, how Kira responded, the timing and mechanics of the encounter. Dr. Sivana listens without interruption, occasionally making notes on her datapad. When I finish, she's quiet for a moment, apparently organizing her thoughts. From your perspective, she says finally, was Cadet Vasquez's response appropriate? This is clearly a loaded question. The wrong answer could result in both of us being expelled, or worse, could lead to policy changes that make it even harder for future human students to integrate into galactic educational systems. From a human perspective, I say carefully, her response was entirely predictable. Instructor Zixketh demonstrated that the normal social contract, mutual respect in exchange for cooperation, was no longer in effect. Kira responded according to the backup protocol, which you described as violence, which I described as problem-solving. Dr. Sivana's appendages shift in what might be surprise or interest. You consider violence to be a form of problem-solving? I consider it to be a tool. Like any tool, it can be used appropriately or inappropriately, effectively or ineffectively. But yes, for humans, violence is a legitimate problem-solving approach under certain circumstances, such as when someone demonstrates that they're willing to harm you and that normal social constraints aren't going to prevent them from doing it again. She makes more notes. I'm starting to wonder if I'm helping or making things worse. Do you believe that human students require different educational approaches than other species? I believe that all students require educational approaches that account for their natural behavioral patterns and psychological development. For most galactic species, that means cooperative learning environments with clear hierarchical structures and predictable consequences. And for humans, it means environments where competence is demonstrated rather than simply asserted, where respect is earned rather than automatically granted, and where the consequences for crossing boundaries are immediate and proportional. Dr. Savannah is quiet for a long moment, her appendages moving across the datapad in patterns that suggest complex calculations or possibly frustration. The Federation's educational policies are based on principles of universal accessibility and equal treatment, she says finally. Special accommodations for specific species could be seen as discriminatory. With respect, Doctor, I reply. You already make special accommodations. The atmospheric controls, the dietary requirements, the physiological modifications to furniture and equipment, all of that recognizes that different species have different needs. Those are physical accommodations. And this would be psychological accommodation. I don't see the fundamental difference. More note-taking. I'm definitely making this more complicated than it needs to be. Do you have any recommendations for how the Academy might better serve human students? Here's my chance to actually contribute something useful instead of just explaining why everyone else is wrong. Transparency, I say immediately. Humans respond well to authority when we understand the reasoning behind it. If Instructor Zix had explained why he was using Kira as a demonstration subject, what educational objective he was trying to achieve, and what level of force was necessary to accomplish that objective, she probably would have cooperated. Instead, he just grabbed her and started hitting her, which from a human perspective looks exactly like an attack rather than an educational exercise. Anything else? Competency demonstration. Humans will follow leadership, but we need to see evidence that the leader actually knows what they're doing. An instructor who can't control the force of their demonstrations or who doesn't understand the capabilities of their students is going to have problems with human students. And escalation protocols. Clear guidelines for what constitutes appropriate response to different levels of conflict. Most human students will try to resolve problems through discussion first, but we need to know that there are effective alternatives if discussion doesn't work. Doctor. Savannah closes her datapad and regards me with what I hope is thoughtful consideration, rather than profound disappointment. Thank you, Cadet Morrison. Your perspective has been illuminating. I choose to take that as a good sign. The Federation review team spends another 3 days at the Academy, conducting additional interviews, observing classes, and generally making everyone nervous about whether they're going to recommend sweeping policy changes or simply suggest that human students be quietly discouraged from applying to galactic educational institutions. Kira gets called in for her interview on the 3rd day. She emerges looking slightly dazed and more than a little annoyed. How did it go? I ask as we walk back toward the dormitory. They wanted to know if I have anger management issues. Do you? Apparently. According to their psychological assessment protocols, any human who responds to physical aggression with counter-aggression demonstrates insufficient emotional regulation and problematic authority relationships. This is exactly the kind of fundamental misunderstanding that got us into this situation in the first place. What did you tell them? That their psychological assessment protocols are based on species whose natural response to conflict is submission or flight, and that applying those standards to humans is like trying to diagnose a tiger with behavioral problems because it doesn't act like a sheep. I stop walking. You actually said that? Not in those exact words. I may have been more diplomatic. How diplomatic? I used the word please at least twice. Right. So we're probably not getting glowing reviews from the Federation team. The next morning, Director Veltar calls an assembly for all students and faculty. The Academy's main auditorium is designed to accommodate the entire population, which means it's a vast, multi-tiered space with environmental controls that can be adjusted for different atmospheric requirements and seating arrangements that can be modified for various physiological configurations. Today it's packed. Word about the Federation review has spread throughout the Academy, and everyone wants to know what the official verdict is going to be. Director Veltar takes the central platform, her chromatophores displaying what I've learned to recognize as formal address patterns, steady, authoritative colors that suggest important announcements and official decisions. Students and faculty, she begins, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's sound enhancement systems. The Federation Educational Board has completed their review of our policies regarding human student integration. The auditorium is absolutely silent. Even the usual background noise of environmental systems and student movement has ceased. Their findings indicate that while the recent incident was regrettable, it was primarily the result of inadequate institutional preparation, rather than fundamental incompatibility between human students and galactic educational standards. A collective sigh of relief seems to pass through the assembled crowd. However, Director Veltar continues, and the tension immediately ratchets back up. The review team has identified several areas where our current protocols require significant modification. Here it comes. Effective immediately, the Academy will implement new behavioral management guidelines specifically designed for students from predator species backgrounds. These will include modified disciplinary procedures, alternative conflict resolution protocols, and enhanced cross-species sensitivity training for all faculty members. She pauses, apparently organizing her thoughts for the next part. Additionally, we will be participating in a pilot program for integrated species education, working with Federation researchers to develop more effective approaches to multi-species learning environments. In practical terms, this means that advanced combat theory will be restructured to better accommodate different species' natural behavioral patterns. Students will be grouped according to compatible psychological profiles rather than simply by academic level. I can see where this is going, and I'm not sure if it's a victory or just a more sophisticated form of segregation. Furthermore, the director continues, the Academy will be hosting additional human students in the coming term, as well as students from other predator species, to better assess the effectiveness of these new approaches. More humans, more predators, more students who don't fit the standard galactic model of proper educational behavior. This should be interesting. The assembly breaks up with the kind of animated discussion that follows any major policy announcement. Students cluster in species-specific groups, faculty members huddle in professional conferences, and everyone seems to have opinions about what these changes mean for the Academy's future. Kira and I find ourselves at the center of more attention than I'm entirely comfortable with. Apparently, being the catalyst for institutional reform comes with a certain amount of celebrity status, whether you want it or not. So, says Velnash, one of the Velkari students who's been in our advanced combat theory class. You're the humans who broke Instructor Zixketh. Velnash looks like someone crossed a bear with a tank, and then gave the result advanced degrees in engineering and tactical analysis. His species tends toward direct communication, and what humans would recognize as a refreshingly straightforward approach to problem-solving. Kira broke Instructor Zixketh, I correct. I just watched. Good technique, Velnash continues, apparently conducting his own post-incident analysis. Clean joint separation, minimal collateral damage, appropriate force application, very efficient. Thanks, Kira replies, sounding slightly uncertain about whether she's being complimented or clinically assessed. My species has similar response patterns, he explains. Authority must be earned through demonstration of competence. Instructor Zixketh demonstrated incompetence. Logical to remove him from position of authority. It's oddly reassuring to discover that we're not the only ones who think the whole situation was perfectly reasonable. The new protocols, Velnash continues, should improve educational outcomes for all predator species students. Better behavioral management, more appropriate conflict resolution. Good changes. A group of Silthek students approaches, their crystalline bodies chiming softly as they move. Silthek communication involves a combination of harmonic resonance and light patterns, which their translators render into standard galactic languages with varying degrees of success. We have been discussing the incident, their apparent spokesperson announces, and we wish to express support for alternative educational approaches. This is unexpected. The Silthek evolved from something resembling a silicon-based coral reef, and their natural behavior patterns are about as far from human aggression as you can get while still qualifying as intelligent life. While our species does not share your conflict response patterns, the Silthek continues, we recognize the value of educational systems that accommodate natural behavioral variations. Our own learning processes are significantly different from standard galactic models, another adds. We have long advocated for more flexible institutional approaches. It's starting to dawn on me that this situation might be bigger than just human integration issues. The Federation's educational policies are apparently based on the behavioral norms of a relatively small number of species, and everyone else has been adapting as best they can. Maybe what we've actually done is open the door for a more comprehensive examination of whether the current system actually works for anyone. The real question, says another voice, and I turn to see Dr. Kexthul approaching our informal gathering, is whether these changes will be sufficient to address the underlying issues. Dr. Kexthal teaches advanced xenosociology and has a reputation for asking uncomfortable questions about galactic civilization's basic assumptions. She's also one of the few faculty members who seemed genuinely unsurprised by the combat theory incident. Meaning? I ask. Meaning that institutional modifications are only useful if they address the actual problem. And the actual problem isn't that humans are too aggressive or that current protocols are too restrictive. She settles into a nearby seating arrangement, her multiple appendages adjusting for what appears to be a longer conversation. The actual problem is that the Federation's entire approach to interspecies relations is based on the assumption that all intelligent species will eventually converge on similar behavioral norms and social structures. But they won't, Kira says, understanding where this is going. Exactly. Evolutionary psychology doesn't work that way. Species that evolved in different environments, with different selection pressures and different survival challenges, are going to develop fundamentally different approaches to social organization, conflict resolution, and authority relationships. So, what you're saying, I interject, is that trying to create universal educational standards is like trying to design universal food that every species can eat. Precisely. You end up with something that's technically adequate for everyone but optimal for no one. The group around us has grown as more students and even a few faculty members are drawn into the discussion. It's becoming clear that the combat theory incident has become a focal point for much larger questions about how galactic civilization actually works. The Federation model, Dr. Kexthal continues, assumes that intelligence necessarily leads to cooperation. Cooperation leads to peaceful social structures, and peaceful social structures require submission to legitimate authority. But humans prove that you can have intelligence, cooperation, and peaceful social structures while maintaining a fundamentally different relationship with authority. We cooperate when it makes sense, Kira adds. We follow leadership when it's competent. But we don't submit just because someone claims to be in charge. And that terrifies most of the galaxy, Dr. Kexthal concludes, because it suggests that their entire social model might be just one option among many, rather than the inevitable result of evolutionary progress. The conversation continues for another hour, ranging across topics from evolutionary biology to political philosophy to practical questions about how to design educational systems that actually work for everyone involved. It's the kind of wide-ranging, intellectually stimulating discussion that I'd hoped to find at an advanced galactic institution. And it's happening because someone finally acknowledged that humans don't fit the standard models. Eventually, the group disperses as students head off to various classes and obligations. Kira and I walk back toward our dormitory, both of us processing what's become a much more complex situation than either of us anticipated. So, I say as we cross the central plaza, think we've made things better or worse? Better, I think. Probably. Maybe. That's definitive. Look, here's how I see it, she says, stopping near the memorial garden where we'd had a similar conversation a few days earlier. Before, everyone was operating under a set of assumptions that were wrong but comfortable. Humans are fragile and docile. Standard protocols work for everyone. Authority should be automatically respected. Violence is always inappropriate. Now, those assumptions have been challenged. That's going to make some people uncomfortable, and it's going to require some significant changes to how things work around here. But the alternative was to keep pretending that humans are something we're not, and eventually that was going to lead to much bigger problems. She's right. The Federation's current approach to human integration seems sustainable in the short term, but it's based on a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. Better to address that now in an educational context than to wait until it becomes a diplomatic or military issue. Besides, she continues, I think we've demonstrated something important. Which is? That humans can work within galactic institutions, but only if those institutions are willing to work with us as we actually are. And if they're not, then we'll work around them, or through them, or if necessary, over their objections. This is either an inspiring statement about human adaptability, or a mildly threatening declaration of independence. Possibly both. You know what the really interesting part is? I say as we reach our dormitory. What? I think we're about to find out what happens when the galaxy starts taking humans seriously. Is that good or bad? I honestly have no idea. But it's definitely going to be interesting. 3 months later, the Academy's new integrated species education program is, well, calling it a success would be premature, but it's definitely producing results. The predator species classes have evolved into something that's part academic instruction, part group therapy session, and part controlled chaos management experiment. Our advanced combat theory class now includes 12 humans, 8 Velkari, 4 Kresh, and 2 beings from a species called the Vex'tai, who look like armored spiders and communicate primarily through pheromone releases that the translation systems render as elaborate profanity. The dynamic is energetic. Instructor Zixketh, to his credit, has adapted to the new teaching requirements with what I can only describe as professional determination. His arm healed completely, and he's completed an intensive course in multi-species behavioral psychology that apparently included significant sections on appropriate force calibration and earning respect through competence demonstration. He still uses physical demonstrations, but now he explains what he's doing, why he's doing it, and what educational objective it's meant to accomplish. He also asks for volunteers rather than simply selecting targets, and he's learned to gauge his force levels based on each species' physiology rather than his own. Most importantly, he's learned to recognize when his authority is being tested versus when it's being actively challenged, and he's developed responses that address the underlying concerns rather than simply asserting dominance. The results speak for themselves. Incident reports in predator species classes have dropped by 78%. Student satisfaction scores have improved across all metrics. And, perhaps most significantly, the Academy has received inquiries from other institutions wanting to implement similar programs. Of course, it's not all smooth sailing. The Federation Educational Board is still debating whether these programs represent necessary innovation or dangerous precedent. There are ongoing discussions about standardization, replication, and whether accommodating species-specific behavioral patterns undermines the basic principles of universal education. But those are policy discussions happening in committee rooms and administrative offices. Down here, where the actual education happens, things are working. You know what I realized? Kira says as we walk across the training grounds after another successful combat theory class. Today's lesson covered multi-species tactical coordination, which involved a lot of complicated maneuvering and only minimal property damage. What? This whole thing was never really about us. I mean, it was, but it was also about something bigger. She's right, of course. What started as a simple case of institutional incompetence has turned into a broader examination of how galactic civilization handles diversity. Not just biological diversity, but behavioral, psychological, and cultural diversity. The Federation model works fine when everyone shares similar assumptions about cooperation, authority, and conflict resolution, she continues. But as more species join the galactic community, those shared assumptions are going to become less universal. So what we've done here, figuring out how to accommodate different behavioral patterns while maintaining institutional effectiveness, that's going to become increasingly important. We pass a group of mixed-species students working on what appears to be a collaborative engineering project. Humans, Silthek, Velkari, and several species I don't recognize are clustered around a complex mechanical assembly. Their different physiologies and communication methods creating a fascinating tableau of interspecies cooperation. 6 months ago, that scene would have been nearly impossible. The behavioral incompatibilities, communication barriers, and conflicting approaches to problem-solving would have made meaningful collaboration extremely difficult. Now it looks normal, which is probably the most significant change of all. Think it'll last? I ask. The program? The policy changes? The improved interspecies relations? All of it, I guess. Kira considers this as we approach our dormitory. The building looks the same as it did when we arrived, but somehow it feels different now. More inclusive, maybe. More aware of the complexity of trying to create functional communities out of fundamentally different species. I think, she says finally, that we've proven something important. Not just that humans can work within galactic institutions, but that galactic institutions can work with humans. And that's enough? For now. The rest is going to depend on what the next group of human students does with the foundation we've built. She's right again. Next term, the Academy will host 47 human students, more than triple the current number. They'll also be welcoming students from 6 additional predator species and implementing the integrated education model across all academic departments. What we've done here will either prove to be a successful pilot program that gets replicated throughout the Federation, or an interesting experiment that couldn't scale beyond the specific circumstances of the Vex'tai Academy. But either way, we've changed the conversation. The galaxy now has to acknowledge that humans are more than just another minor species that can be managed through standard protocols. We're something that requires actual understanding, genuine accommodation, and, perhaps most importantly, a willingness to accept that there might be more than one way to organize an intelligent society. You know what the best part is? I say as we reach our rooms.
What? Instructor Vex'tai asked me yesterday if I'd be interested in staying for an additional term to help train the new human students.
Are you going to do it? I'm thinking about it. Seems like the kind of thing that might be useful. Plus, it would give you more opportunities to explain human behavioral patterns to confused alien instructors.
There is that, I admit.
I've gotten pretty good at the humans are not defective aliens lecture. Kira laughs, which is a sound I've grown fond of over the past few months. It's genuine and unguarded and completely human, and in a place like this, surrounded by the beautiful, strange complexity of galactic civilization, it's nice to have something that reminds you of home.
Think they'll ever really understand us?
She asks. Probably not completely. But I think they're starting to understand that they don't need to understand us completely in order to work with us effectively. And that's enough? For now, the rest we can figure out as we go. We part ways at our respective room doors, and I settle in for what's become my evening routine. Reading reports from other Federation institutions that are considering implementing similar programs, reviewing applications from prospective human students, and trying to write coherent explanations of human psychology for audiences that evolved from entirely different environmental pressures. It's challenging work, but it's also deeply satisfying. Every successful interaction between human and alien students, every conflict that gets resolved through understanding rather than force, every small step toward a more inclusive galactic community, all of it represents progress towards something that seemed impossible when I first arrived here. The galaxy is big enough for all of us. We just need to figure out how to make room. Outside my window, Kepler 442b's twin moons are rising over the Academy's training grounds, casting complex shadows across the mixed species student groups that are taking advantage of the cooler evening temperatures for outdoor exercises. Humans and aliens working together, learning from each other, building something new. It's not perfect. It's probably not even optimal. But it's real, and it's functional, and it's genuinely inclusive in ways that the old system never was. And maybe, just maybe, it's the beginning of something bigger. Something that could change how the entire galaxy thinks about cooperation, diversity, and what it means to build a civilization that works for everyone. Of course, that's a conversation for tomorrow. Tonight I have reports to review and applications to process. After all, the next group of human students is going to need all the help they can get. Epilogue, 6 months later. The Federation Educational Board's final report on the Vex'tai Academy pilot program runs to 847 pages and includes 17 appendices, 43 statistical analyses, and what the summary describes as comprehensive recommendations for system-wide implementation of species-specific educational accommodations. The short version? It worked. Human student satisfaction scores improved by 156%. Interspecies cooperation metrics reached levels previously considered theoretically impossible. Incident reports dropped to near zero levels. Faculty satisfaction improved across all measured categories. Most importantly, academic performance indicators showed that students in integrated, species-accommodating programs consistently outperformed their peers in traditional educational environments. The Federation's response was swift and comprehensive. Within 6 standard months, 23 institutions had implemented modified versions of the Academy's program. Within a year, it had become the default model for interspecies education throughout the Federation. The galaxy, it turns out, was ready for change. They just needed someone to demonstrate that change was possible. Kira ended up staying for 3 additional terms, eventually accepting a permanent position as Assistant Director of Interspecies Educational Development. She's currently working on extending the integrated model to primary education systems, and has become something of a celebrity in xenopsychology circles. I returned to Earth after completing my original exchange term, but I brought with me a comprehensive understanding of galactic educational systems and a portfolio of successful interspecies cooperation strategies. The Federation offered me a position with their Educational Development Council, which I accepted after negotiating for the authority to implement human-compatible programs at any institution that requests them. Instructor Vex'tai received the Federation Educational Excellence Award for his contributions to multi-species pedagogy. His arm fully healed, with no lasting mobility issues, and he's now considered one of the leading experts on predator species educational psychology. He still occasionally asks if I think Kira would be willing to demonstrate additional techniques for his classes. I still tell him that's probably not a good idea. The Academy itself has become a model institution, hosting delegations from throughout the galaxy who want to understand how to create genuinely inclusive educational environments. The Memorial Garden now includes a new plaque honoring the advancement of interspecies understanding through practical application of behavioral accommodation principles. It doesn't mention anyone by name, which is probably for the best. As for the broader question of human integration into galactic society, well, that's still a work in progress. But it's progress in the right direction. The galaxy is learning to work with humans as we actually are, rather than as they think we should be. And humans are learning that we can be part of something larger than ourselves, without losing what makes us human. It's not a perfect solution, but it's a functional one. And sometimes functional is enough to build something better. The galaxy is big enough for all of us. We're finally starting to figure out how to make that work. The end.